It was an ordinary morning in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where the houses lined up neatly like soldiers in a row. Among them was one that stood out, though not for its size or modern design but for its history. The house had been a silent witness to decades of life, love, and change. It was the kind of place that made you stop for a second, just to admire how it had somehow withstood the march of time. This was the home of an elderly woman who had lived there for as long as anyone could remember. She had grown old within these walls, and they had become a part of her just as she had become a part of them. Her name was Evelyn, a woman of grace, kindness, and remarkable strength. She had seen the world change in ways that few could comprehend. Yet through it all, her home had been her constant, a place that anchored her, gave her comfort, and kept her memories safe. The house, though aged, was not one of those that seemed neglected or forgotten. It stood proudly, almost as if it refused to be overtaken by time. The shutters were weathered, the paint on the porch was chipped, but there was a warmth about the place. Inside, the air was filled with the soft scent of old wood, and the walls echoed with the sounds of a life well lived. Evelyn had lived here since she was a young girl, and every corner of the house held a story. The living room, with its mismatched furniture, was where she had spent countless evenings reading books or talking to family. The kitchen, small but cozy, had seen generations of cooking and laughter. And the dining room, with its antique table, had been the setting for many family gatherings, holiday meals, and quiet moments of reflection. But now, Evelyn had made a decision that would change everything. At the age of 97, she realized it was time to let go of the place that had been her home for so long. There was no family left to pass it on to. Her children, now grown with families of their own, lived far away. Her friends had all passed on or moved to different places. The house, while full of memories, was no longer practical for her. She was tired, and it was time to move on. One chilly autumn morning, Evelyn made the call to a local real estate agent. It wasn't a decision she made lightly, but deep down, she knew it was the right one. She needed help to sell the house, to find someone who would love it as much as she had, someone who would see it not just for its value, but for the life it had held within its walls. The real estate agents who received the call were a husband and wife duo, John and Claire. They had been in the business for years, helping people buy and sell homes. When they received the assignment, they were eager to help, but they had no idea what they were stepping into. Evelyn had explained the basics of the house over the phone, but there was something in her voice that told them this wouldn't be just another sale. There was something special about this house, something that couldn't be described in a list of features or an appraisal. John and Claire arrived at the house a few days later. The first thing that struck them was how well kept the yard was. It wasn't the sprawling, manicured lawn of a modern home, but it had a charm all its own. The flowers that still bloomed in the front garden, the ivy that climbed up the side of the house. It was as if the house had a life of its own, gently preserved by the woman who lived inside. When Evelyn greeted them at the door, she did so with a smile that spoke of years of kindness and resilience. She was small in stature, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and eyes that sparkled despite her age. She was sharp as a tack and knew exactly what she wanted. She welcomed the agents in, offering them tea as they sat down in the living room to discuss the sale. As they talked, Evelyn shared bits and pieces of her life, stories of raising children in this very house, of the laughter and love that had filled the rooms. She spoke fondly of her late husband, who had been a quiet, thoughtful man, and how they had both cherished this home as the center of their lives. She told them about the many neighbors who had come and gone over the years, the friendships that had been formed, and the children who had played on the lawn. But as the conversation continued, it became clear to John and Claire that Evelyn wasn't just selling a house. She was letting go of a piece of her heart, a chapter of her life that had meant everything to her. The agents felt a deep sense of respect for her as she spoke. It wasn't just about the bricks and mortar. It was about the memories, the history, the love that had filled this space for decades. After some time, the three of them decided it was time to tour the house. Evelyn led the way, her steps slow but steady, her hand gently touching the walls as they passed through each room. The first stop was the living room, where Evelyn had spent countless hours. The furniture, though dated, had a certain warmth to it. The faded rug on the floor, The worn cushions on the couch and the old lamps that had seen better days all told the story of a life well lived. They moved on to the kitchen, where Evelyn paused for a moment. It was small, with yellowed cabinets and a table that looked as though it had hosted thousands of family meals. The smell of old wood and home-cooked meals lingered in the air. She smiled as she told John and Claire about her husband's love for cooking, and how they had shared so many quiet evenings together in this very room. The tour continued through the rest of the house, each room telling its own story. There were old photographs on the walls, bookshelves filled with novels that had once been read cover to cover, and trinkets that had been collected over the years. But the most striking part of the house was the way it felt. It wasn't just a collection of rooms. It was a living memory, a place where the past and present coexisted in perfect harmony. But it was when they reached the attic that things started to take a more mysterious turn. Evelyn had always been somewhat private about the attic, and she led the agents up the narrow staircase with a sense of hesitation. When they reached the top, the attic was filled with boxes, some neatly stacked, others spilling over with old papers and forgotten belongings. John and Claire started digging through the boxes, expecting to find the usual assortment of old clothes, holiday decorations, and perhaps a few old family keepsakes. But as they sifted through the items, they began to notice something strange. There were collections of things that didn't seem to belong. A stack of old newspapers, some of which were dated from decades ago, a box full of vintage postcards from places all over the world. And then, hidden beneath a pile of fabric, something that caught their attention. A small, weathered trunk. Evelyn watched them from the doorway, a glimmer of recognition in her eyes as they pulled the trunk out of the attic. She had never mentioned it before, but as John and Claire opened it, they realized it was filled with items that told a story all on their own. Inside, they found vintage coins, military medals, and old photographs, each piece more valuable than the last. It was as though Evelyn's husband had collected these treasures over the years, but had never fully shared them with anyone. As John and Claire began to sift through the trunk, they exchanged glances. They were beginning to understand that this house, with all its ordinary charm, was also a treasure trove of history, both personal and worldly. And Evelyn, in her quiet way, had never been one to boast about it. The tour ended, and they sat down once more, Evelyn quietly sipping her tea. There was a moment of silence, one that spoke volumes. The agents, now deeply moved by the experience, realized that this was not just another property to sell. It was a piece of living history, a home filled with stories that would continue to be told, long after Evelyn had moved on. As the day drew to a close, John and Claire made their way to the door, each of them with a deep sense of respect and awe for the woman who had entrusted them with her home. They knew that selling this house would be no ordinary task. It would require more than just paperwork and negotiations. It would require understanding the soul of the place, the memories that had been built inside it, and the life that had flourished within its walls. But Evelyn had made her decision, and now it was time to say goodbye. John and Claire left Evelyn's house that day with more than just a new listing on their hands. There was something about the place that had left an impression on them, something beyond the dust and old furniture, beyond the outdated wallpaper and creaky floorboards. They had walked through a house filled with memories, but also with mystery. The attic, the trunk, the old photographs, it all seemed so much more than just a collection of items and spaces. It felt like the house had stories to tell, stories that had been hidden away for years. The next few days were spent preparing for the sale. John and Claire made their usual rounds, taking measurements, checking the structure of the house, and putting together a plan to show it off in the best light. But every time they thought about the house, their minds kept drifting back to that attic. They knew there was more to discover, but they didn't want to rush it. Evelyn had trusted them with the house, and they didn't want to push her boundaries too much. As the week went on, John decided it would be a good idea to visit Evelyn again, just to make sure everything was going smoothly. When he arrived, Evelyn was sitting on her porch, knitting quietly in the warm afternoon sun. She greeted him with a smile, her sharp eyes twinkling as she looked up from her work. "I thought I'd come by and check on things," John said, walking up the steps and taking a seat beside her. "Is everything okay with the process?" "Oh yes, dear. Everything is fine," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but strong. "I'm just trying to enjoy these last few days in my home. It feels strange, but But I'm ready. John nodded, understanding her feelings. Selling a house wasn't just about paperwork and numbers. It was about saying goodbye to a lifetime of memories. He had seen it before in other homes, but there was something different about Evelyn's situation. She had lived in this house for nearly her entire life, and now she was letting it go. It was a lot to process, and John could see that she was holding up well, but the sadness was there beneath the surface. "Have you thought more about the things we found in the attic?" John asked gently, not wanting to push but feeling a curiosity he couldn't shake. Evelyn paused, her knitting needles stilling in her hands. She looked out at the yard for a moment as if lost in thought. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet. "I knew you'd find them eventually," she said, almost to herself. "My husband was quite the collector, always bringing home something interesting from his travels. He loved history more than anything else. And I suppose that's why he kept all those things. Not just for himself, but because he wanted to leave a record of it." "A reminder." John leaned in, intrigued. "A reminder of what?" Evelyn's eyes glimmered as she turned toward him. "Of the stories. The stories that come with everything we collect. Those coins, those old books, the photographs. Each one has a story behind it. Some of them are his, some are mine, and some belong to the world." John felt a shiver of excitement run down his spine. It wasn't just about selling a house anymore, it was about uncovering history. He had been in real estate long enough to know that some properties had a certain aura to them. But this one was different. It wasn't just the house that held value. It was everything inside it. Everything Evelyn and her husband had left behind. "Do you mind if we take another look at the attic?" John asked carefully. "I think there's more to those items than meets the eye." Evelyn thought for a moment, then nodded. "I trust you, John. But be gentle with them. They're not just things, they're memories." John promised he would be careful. He left the porch and headed inside, where Claire was already going over some of the paperwork. She looked up as he walked in, raising an eyebrow. "Back so soon? I thought we were done for the day." "We're not done yet," John replied, a spark in his eyes. "I think we missed something in the attic." Claire's interest piqued immediately. She stood up and followed him to the stairs that led up to the attic. Evelyn followed behind them, still moving slowly but with a sense of purpose. She led them up into the dusty, dimly lit space once again. As they climbed into the attic, the air smelled like old paper and wood. It was a room that hadn't changed much over the years, packed with boxes and stacks of forgotten belongings. The trunk was still there, sitting quietly in the corner, almost like it was waiting for them to return. John and Claire began digging through the boxes again, carefully sifting through the contents, looking for anything that might reveal more of the history Evelyn had alluded to. This time, they moved slower, paying more attention to the small details. They opened a box filled with old letters, their edges yellowed with age. Some were written in delicate handwriting. Others were typewritten, but all of them were dated from long ago. Claire picked up a few, scanning the words. "These letters are from the 1940s, she said, her voice full of surprise. "They're not just personal, they're historical." John looked over her shoulder, reading the first few lines. They were letters from Evelyn's husband to his family, recounting his experiences during a time of war and change. His words painted a picture of a man who had traveled the world, who had seen things most people could only dream of. But more than that, they showed a man who cared deeply about the people in his life, about the legacy he was leaving behind. "This is incredible," John whispered. "These letters are a piece of history." Evelyn, who had been watching them quietly, smiled faintly. "He never talked much about those days. I think he kept the letters more for himself, for his own memories. But he always believed in the importance of remembering where we come from." John and Claire continued going through the boxes, each one revealing more treasures. There were photographs from places that seemed impossible to have visited, old postcards from cities and countries that no longer existed. They found maps, carefully folded and marked with notes from Evelyn's husband's travels, tracing the routes he had taken. The attic seemed endless, with box after box of artifacts from the past. But what really caught their attention was the collection of antique items, coins, jewelry, and trinkets from different cultures. Some pieces were ornate, others simple, but all of them were beautiful in their own way. It was as if Evelyn's husband had traveled the world not only for adventure, but to collect stories, to bring pieces of history home with him. As they dug deeper into the boxes, Claire found a small wooden box at the very back of the attic. It was old, with intricate carvings on the surface. She opened it carefully, revealing a collection of old, tarnished silver coins. They were from different countries, some worn with age, others almost perfectly preserved. "These are rare," Claire said, her voice full of awe. "Some of these coins are worth a fortune." John nodded, his eyes wide. "This isn't just a house filled with memories. It's a treasure trove, a collection of pieces from history that no one even knew were here." Evelyn, who had been standing quietly in the corner, nodded slowly. "My husband always believed that every object, every piece of history had a purpose. He wanted to make sure those purposes were remembered. That's why he kept it all." As the hours passed, the three of them sat together, sorting through the remnants of a life well lived. They found more letters, more coins, more photographs. They uncovered pieces of history that had been forgotten, tucked away in boxes, gathering dust. But now they were being rediscovered one by one. It was a humbling experience for John and Claire. They had started out thinking they were just selling a house, but they had found so much more. The attic had become a window into the past, a place where the stories of Evelyn's family and her husband's adventures could be told. It was clear that this house, this home, was more than just a place to live. It was a living record of a life well lived, a legacy that would continue long after Evelyn had moved on. As they finished their search, Evelyn walked over to the trunk once more, her fingers gently brushing the lid. "I think it's time for me to let go of all this," she said softly. "But I hope it doesn't just disappear. I hope it finds a home where it can be appreciated." John and Claire nodded, understanding her words more than ever. They had come to this house as real estate agents, but they were leaving with something much more valuable, a deeper understanding of what it meant to live a life full of meaning, of history and of love. They promised Evelyn they would find the right people to carry on her legacy, to honor the stories hidden in this house. It was the least they could do for a woman who had given so much of herself to the home that had been her life. The following days felt like a blur to John and Claire. What had begun as a routine listing quickly turned into a much more profound journey. They had learned that the house Evelyn was letting go of was more than just a piece of property. It was a rich tapestry of memories, stories, and forgotten treasures. Every day they spent there seemed to reveal something new, some small corner of the past that had been hidden away, waiting to be uncovered. Despite all the discoveries they had made, there was still so much more to be explored. The attic, though it had been thoroughly searched, still felt like it held secrets. Evelyn had hinted at it, her words lingering in John's mind as he thought about the hidden treasures she had spoken of. What was in those boxes and trunks that they hadn't yet discovered? What stories had they missed? One chilly morning, after a week of organizing and preparing the house for sale, John and Claire returned to Evelyn's home. They had promised her they would help her move on from the house, and they were determined to do so with care and respect. But there was still that lingering sense of curiosity, the feeling that they were missing something important. They needed to know more, not just for the sale, but for Evelyn's sake. She deserved to have her story told, to have the legacy of her life remembered. When they arrived, they found Evelyn sitting on the porch again, knitting as she had been the last time they visited. She looked up with a smile when she saw them pull into the driveway. It was clear that she had grown fond of the two agents, and they, in turn, had developed a deep sense of admiration and respect for her. Evelyn was not just a client. She had become a friend, a living testament to the strength and resilience of the human spirit. "Morning. Evelyn?" John greeted her warmly as he approached. "Good morning," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but steady. "I was wondering when you'd be back." "We wanted to check in," Claire said as she joined them on the porch. "Make sure everything's moving along smoothly with the sale." Evelyn nodded, looking out at the yard as if deep in thought. "It's strange," she said slowly. "I've spent my entire life here. Every corner of this house has a memory tied to it. It's hard to think of someone else living here, making their own memories." "We understand," John said. "This place is more than just walls and a roof. It's where you've lived, loved, and built your life. That's not something you can just forget." Evelyn smiled faintly, her eyes misting over for a moment before she quickly composed herself. "I'll be okay," she said, though there was a hint of sadness in her voice. "I'm just ready for the next chapter, whatever it may be." John and Claire exchanged a glance. They had already discussed it between themselves, but they both felt it was time to talk to Evelyn about what they had found in the attic. They had been holding back, unsure of how to bring it up. But Evelyn had already shown them that she was willing to share her life, her memories, and her husband's legacy. It was only right to include her in the discovery of the treasures they had uncovered. "Evelyn," Claire began gently, "we found something in the attic. A lot of things, actually. And we think it's important that you know we've discovered more than we could have imagined." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" John leaned forward. "Your husband." He left behind quite a collection of things. Coins, letters, photographs, maps, and so much more. Some of them are incredibly rare and valuable. They tell stories that go beyond just your family. Some of these items have historical significance. Evelyn didn't seem surprised. In fact, she appeared to be expecting it. "I knew it," she said with a small, knowing smile. "He was always so secretive about his collection. I suppose he didn't want me to worry about it. But I think I know exactly what you found." John and Claire both looked at each other in surprise. "You knew?" Claire asked, her voice full of disbelief. "You knew all along?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "I knew. Your husband was an extraordinary man, you know. He didn't just collect things for the sake of collecting. He believed in preserving history. He loved learning about the past, about the world outside of our little town. And I think he wanted to leave behind something that would last, something that told a story." John and Claire were taken aback by her calmness. Most people, upon hearing about a collection of valuable artifacts being found in their homes, would be surprised, even overwhelmed. But Evelyn's reaction was different. She seemed at peace with it, as if she had always known that the house contained something beyond just everyday belongings. "You didn't mention it before," John said, his voice filled with curiosity. "Why?" Evelyn chuckled softly. "He didn't want to burden anyone with it. He kept his collection to himself for the most part, only sharing it with a few close friends. But I suppose now that he's gone, it's time for the world to know. I think it's important for people to understand that history isn't just something that happens in books or museums. It's in the things we leave behind, in the little pieces of our lives." John felt a surge of admiration for Evelyn. She had such a deep understanding of the world, of the value of the everyday things that most people overlooked. She didn't just see objects as things to be sold or discarded. She saw them as carriers of stories, as pieces of a greater narrative. It was a perspective that John had never really considered before, and it made him rethink his approach to the house, to the sale. "I think we've been looking at this all wrong," he said softly, almost to himself. "It's not just about selling a house. It's about telling the story, your story, your husband's story." Evelyn's eyes softened at his words. "I hope you're right," she said. "I hope someone comes along who understands the value of these things. Not just the things themselves, but the memories they carry." And that was when it hit John and Claire. This wasn't just about the house. It was about the legacy of a family. A legacy that in many ways had been hidden away for decades. There were objects in the attic that could change the way people saw history, that could tell a story no one had heard before. The letters, the coins, the maps, they were more than just items from the past. They were pieces of a puzzle, each one contributing to a bigger picture. Over the next few days, John and Claire spent more time in the attic, carefully cataloging everything they had found. They worked quietly, almost reverently, as they sorted through the collection. There were old journals, some written in delicate flowing script, others typed neatly on an old typewriter. They found more photographs, ones they hadn't seen before, capturing moments of adventure and travel. There were stories of distant lands, of people long gone, and of events that had shaped the world in ways they hadn't even realized. It was clear that Evelyn's husband had been more than just a collector. He had been a historian, a storyteller, and now his stories were coming to life piece by piece. As John and Claire worked, they began to feel a sense of responsibility. They couldn't just sell the house and move on. They had to share these discoveries with the world. They had to ensure that Evelyn's husband's legacy was preserved. It wasn't just about the money the items might fetch on the open market. It was about making sure that the stories, the history, the memories lived on. At the same time, they knew they had to respect Evelyn's wishes. She had trusted them with her home, with her memories, and they couldn't let her down. She had spent her life in this house, and now, as she prepared to leave it behind, she deserved to know that her story and her husband's story would not be forgotten. As the days passed, John and Claire made a plan. They would organize an exhibition of the items they had found in the attic. It would be open to the public, but it would also be a tribute to Evelyn and her husband. A way for the world to see what they had discovered, to understand the importance of what had been hidden in that house for so long. And as they shared the news with Evelyn, they could see the relief in her eyes. It wasn't just about letting go of the house. It was about ensuring that the memories, the history, and the love that had been woven into the fabric of the home would be shared with the world. She smiled softly as she listened to their plan. "I think that's a beautiful idea," she said. "Thank you." As the days passed, the excitement surrounding the discovery of the attic treasures grew. John and Claire had been working tirelessly, meticulously cataloging and organizing the collection of items they had uncovered in Evelyn's house. There was a new sense of purpose in the air. This wasn't just about selling a house anymore. It was about preserving a piece of history, about honoring the legacy of a family that had lived in that home for generations. Evelyn had been a steady presence through it all. She had welcomed their ideas and supported their plans to create an exhibition, but there was something else too, something unspoken in her quiet smile. She had always been open about her memories of the house, but as the days wore on, John and Claire began to notice a change in her. It wasn't just that she was preparing to move on from the house. It was as if she was letting go of something deeper, something more personal. She seemed at peace with the process, accepting the changes that were unfolding before her. One afternoon, as they were preparing the house for the exhibition, John took a moment to step outside and catch his breath. He stood on the porch, looking out at the yard where Evelyn had spent so many years. The trees that had once been young saplings were now towering giants, their branches heavy with the weight of time. The garden, though a little overgrown, still held a sense of life. It was clear that this was a place that had been cared for, loved and nurtured for decades. John found himself lost in thought. It was hard to believe that this house, this home, would soon belong to someone else. The idea of strangers moving in, making their own memories within these walls, felt strange to him. But he knew that life went on, that change was inevitable. Evelyn was ready to move on, and though it was difficult, John could see that she was doing so with grace. Just then, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Claire walking toward him, a concerned expression on her face. She had always been the more practical one, the one who focused on the details and kept things moving forward. But today she looked as though she was carrying something heavy on her mind. "Everything okay?" John asked, noticing the look in her eyes. Claire hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "I'm just thinking about the exhibition. It's going to be amazing, but I can't help but feel a little overwhelmed. There's so much history in this house, so much meaning behind everything we've found. I'm just not sure if we're doing it justice." John smiled at her, trying to ease her worries. "You're doing great. We're doing great. We're telling a story that needs to be told, and that's all that matters. Don't forget, this isn't just about the objects. It's about the people. It's about Evelyn, about her husband, about the life they lived here. We're giving them a voice." Claire nodded, but John could tell that she still felt uneasy. "I know," she said, "but I guess I just keep thinking, what if we miss something? What if we don't capture the full story?" John placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "I think we've already captured it. We've been careful, we've been respectful, and we've listened. We'll share everything we've found, and we'll honor it. That's all we can do." Claire gave him a small smile in return, though it was clear she was still processing her thoughts. "You're right," she said. "I guess I just need to remind myself that this isn't about perfection. It's about sharing something real." Before John could respond, the sound of Evelyn's voice interrupted them. "You two look like you're in deep conversation," she said, walking over to them with her usual steady gait. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, not at all," Claire replied, straightening up. "We were just talking about the exhibition. We're excited to share everything with the public, but it's a little overwhelming too." Evelyn smiled warmly, her eyes twinkling with understanding. "I can imagine," she said. "But you're doing something important here. You're bringing the past to life. That's no small task." "I hope so," John said, his tone thoughtful. "But we've been thinking about something. We've uncovered a lot of amazing things in the attic, letters, coins, photographs. But there's one thing we haven't found." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "A story," John said, his voice quiet. "We found all these pieces, but we're still not sure we understand the full picture. There's something we're missing. Something that connects everything. Evelyn nodded slowly as if considering his words. She stood quietly for a moment, then spoke softly. I think I know what you're looking for. John and Claire exchanged a glance, both intrigued by her words. You do? Claire asked. Evelyn smiled gently. There's a letter. It's from my husband. It's the last one he wrote before he passed away. John and Claire stood frozen, caught off guard by the sudden revelation. A letter? They had seen so many letters, so many written words that told stories of adventure and history. But this sounded different. This wasn't just any letter. This was the letter that Evelyn had held on to all these years, the one she had kept hidden away. When did he write it? John asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Evelyn's eyes grew distant for a moment as she remembered. It was a week before he passed. He was in the hospital and he knew his time was running out. He wrote it for me to explain everything, to tell me the things he couldn't say in person. Claire stepped forward. Can we read it? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening around the knitting needles she had been holding. I've never shown anyone. It's very personal. But I think it's time. With that, she led them into the house, her steps slow but steady. They walked into the living room where Evelyn motioned for them to sit. She went to a drawer in an old wooden cabinet and pulled out a small weathered envelope. The paper was thin and yellowed with age, the edges slightly curled. She handed it to John, who held it carefully, almost reverently. It felt like they were about to unlock a secret that had been buried for a long time. Evelyn took a deep breath and sat down across from them. I want you to understand, she said quietly. This letter is everything. It's not just a goodbye. It's a message. A final piece of the puzzle. John opened the envelope slowly, and as he unfolded the letter, he felt an almost overwhelming sense of anticipation. He began to read aloud. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, then I've already gone. I want you to know that I am at peace, that I am no longer burdened by the weight of this world. But there's something I need to tell you, something I've never been able to say before. I've spent my life collecting things, coins, maps, letters, photographs, but none of them ever captured what I wanted most. What I wanted most was you. You have been my greatest adventure, my greatest treasure. Every moment with you has been worth more than all the gold in the world. But I was so focused on preserving history, on collecting pieces of the past, that I didn't always take the time to preserve what mattered most, our time together. I've kept these things, but they aren't mine to keep. They are meant to be shared, to be remembered. And that is why I leave them to you. Not because they hold any real value, but because they tell our story. Our story, Evelyn, and when the time is right, I hope someone will tell it. Thank you for being my greatest treasure. I love you now and always. Yours forever, your husband. John and Claire sat in stunned silence as they finished reading. The weight of the words hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. It was as if they were all trying to process the depth of what they had just learned. Finally, Evelyn spoke, her voice trembling slightly. He always said that he couldn't leave me with nothing, but I didn't know he meant it like this. He was always about the bigger picture, the history, but in the end it was me he wanted to remember. John looked at Evelyn, his heart heavy with emotion. He was right. Your story is the most important part of all of this. Evelyn smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for understanding. After the letter was read, the room fell into a deep, quiet silence. The weight of the words hung in the air, almost tangible, as if the room itself was holding its breath. John and Claire sat there, processing what they had just heard. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing not just the past, but the deep love and commitment that had defined Evelyn's life. The letter had been more than just a farewell. It was a final gift, a testament to the love that had been shared in that house. Evelyn sat across from them, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes were closed for a moment, as if she was savoring the memory of her husband's voice, the love he had left her. There was a peace in her expression, a quiet acceptance that felt both heartbreaking and beautiful. I'm sorry, she said after a long pause, her voice soft. I didn't mean to overwhelm you both with this. No, not at all, Claire said gently, her voice filled with understanding. This is the heart of everything. This letter, it connects everything we've found, everything we've learned. It's not just about the objects in the attic. It's about the love, the stories, the history that's been passed down. John nodded in agreement. You've given us the missing piece. We had no idea how much of your story we were missing until now. Evelyn smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. I always knew he kept that letter for a reason. He never wanted to burden me with it while he was still here. But now I see it was his way of ensuring I wouldn't forget, that I would remember not just the things he collected, but the love we shared. Claire and John exchanged a glance. There was a certain tenderness in the way they looked at Evelyn now, a deeper appreciation for the woman who had entrusted them with not just her home, but her memories. We're going to honor this, John said quietly. We'll make sure your story, your husband's story, is told the right way. This house, these things, they deserve to be remembered for what they are, for what they mean. Evelyn nodded slowly, her expression calm. I trust you both. I always have. I know you'll do right by us. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. The exhibition that John and Claire had planned was quickly taking shape. They worked together to organize the items from the attic, each piece a window into a different time, a different part of Evelyn and her husband's life. The photographs, letters, coins, and maps all came together in a way that told a story bigger than any one object. It was a story of love, of history, of passion for the world outside the walls of their small town. The exhibition itself was an overwhelming success. People from all walks of life came to see the collection, and many were moved by the story that unfolded before them. They marveled at the coins that had once belonged to emperors, the letters that had crossed oceans, the maps that had guided adventurers through unknown lands. But it wasn't just the physical items that captivated them. It was the story behind them, the story of a man who had spent his life collecting, not for the sake of wealth, but for the love of history, for the belief that the past could teach us something valuable. Evelyn attended the exhibition on opening day, though she kept to the back, watching quietly as people wandered through the rooms, their eyes wide with wonder at the treasures on display. John and Claire had arranged for her to have a private moment with the collection, a chance to revisit the items that had once been so familiar to her. As she walked through the room, she paused in front of a display case that contained a photograph of her and her husband, taken on a trip they had taken to a distant country. The photo was old, faded, but the joy on their faces was clear. Even after all these years, she stood there for a long time, her fingers lightly touching the glass of the display case, as if she could feel the warmth of the memory. John and Claire approached her quietly, not wanting to interrupt her moment. "It's beautiful," Evelyn said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I never thought I'd see it like this, like it mattered to anyone other than me." "It matters," Claire said gently. "Your story matters. Your love matters." Evelyn smiled at them, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I never wanted much. Just a quiet life, a place to call home. But now seeing all of this, seeing how you've brought everything together, it means more than I can put into words." John placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her the comfort of his presence. "We're honored to help share it. This isn't just about selling a house. This is about remembering the people who lived here, the lives that were shaped by these walls." The exhibition lasted for several weeks, and each day brought new visitors, new stories, and new connections. People who had never known Evelyn or her husband were moved by the exhibits. Some recognized familiar places in the photographs. Some remembered distant relatives in the letters. But no one left without feeling that they had witnessed something special, something timeless. As the exhibition came to a close, Evelyn stood in front of the house one last time. She had made peace with her decision to leave, with the idea of the house belonging to someone else, but that didn't make it any easier. It was hard to say goodbye to a place that had been her home for so many years, a place where so much of her life had unfolded. But as she stood there looking at the house for the last time, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. "It's time," she whispered to herself. John and Claire stood beside her, waiting in silence as she took in the view. She had spent so many years here, but she knew it was time for the next chapter, just as her husband had written in his letter. The house would always be a part of her, a part of their shared history. But now it was time for someone else to make their own memories within these walls. As they turned to leave, Evelyn looked at the house one final time, a smile playing on her lips. "Thank you," she said quietly to John and Claire. "Thank you for helping me remember, for helping me let go." John and Claire nodded, knowing that their work had come to a close, but also understanding that this journey was about so much more than just selling a house. It was about honoring the past, about giving people a voice. and about preserving the stories that often get forgotten in the rush of everyday life. As they drove away, Evelyn stood on the porch watching them leave. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had lived, for the memories she had made, and for the love that had filled the house. And though she was leaving, she knew that the story of her life and her husband's life would live on. The house might change hands, but the memories, the history, would never fade. The journey had come full circle. And as the sun set on that small, quiet street, Evelyn felt ready for whatever the future held. Her heart was at peace, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free.